not making any money. This is for educational purposes only. Fair use. Fair use. Barakatah Yahawah. Barakatah Yahawashi. Kahaloyum. Yahawah. BaHaSham. Yahawashi. BaHaSham. Rawchaa QaDash. I'd like to give double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well and do well, to the elder apostles, bishops in Connecticut, the bishops, the preachers, the teachers, the evangelists, and the four winds, preaching in truth and sincerity, risking your lives more now than ever, the hopeful elect, shalom, to the Israelite foreigners, whose phenotype may look like another nation, but bloodline goes back to Israel through your father and have come back to the fold, shalom, to sisters Yahawah, who listen and learn under your husband, which is your spiritual leader, with meekness and with silence. This your brother Ram Yahawah with the lesson.
Let's talk about 3 minutes regarding African slavery. The reason this is important is because if you've ever brought up the transatlantic slave trade to American and European, often you'll hear things like, oh, Africans sold their own people, or things like, for instance, oh, slavery was always practiced in Africa. And often these comments are pretty much made to kind of justify the transatlantic slave trade because the idea is Africans were equally responsible for it. And I want to debunk that. So let's look at a couple things first of all. The first myth I want to talk about is the idea that Africans sold their own people. And it's actually quite laughable because, yes, obviously Africans did sell other Africans, but there was no pan-African identity at the time. Saying Africans sold their own people is not true because what was done is certain groups would capture members of another group and sell those people. Still absolutely horrendous, but saying that they sold their own people is kind of like saying when Germany invaded Austria or invaded Russia, Germany was invading itself. It was invading its own people because, all these people are European. But of course, we recognize that Germany, Austria, and Russia are separate groups and that we don't use that kind of language. So why do we use it when it comes to Africans that are of many different groups? Africans did not sell their own people. They did not sell like their family members or friends or anything like that. They sold others from other groups, which is horrible, but that is just simply a lie that they sold their own people. The second thing I also want to talk about is this idea that all the slave trade that was being done that the Africans were selling, all the slaves that the Africans were selling, was completely voluntary. And in the book Black Marxism by Walter Rodney points out that, yes, of course, there was a time period where different African groups were willingly selling slaves to Europeans, but at a certain point, when they tried selling anything else, cash crops or even like manufacturing, Europeans refused to buy these products because they didn't want any competition with their domestic markets. The Europeans pretty much imposed these unequal trade relations where Africa would have to continue to sell slaves even if they didn't want to. So, not all of this was done voluntarily. Often it was done under pressure in unequal trade relations between Europeans and Africans. And the third thing I want to talk about is just this idea that, slavery was always practiced in Africa. First of all, not all societies did it. But the other thing also is where slavery was done, it has never been done to the extent that slavery was done in Brazil or the American South. It was not hereditary, for instance, for the most part. It was not as grueling for the most part. Some slaves, for instance, could rise in rank and actually be able to buy their freedom. And again, slavery is horrible, but it was never, no African economy was as dependent on slaves as the so-called New World was. So there you go. Those are some myths I want to debunk regarding African slavery. Let me know if you've heard any other myths in the comments, and what do you think of this? Thank you so much.
Black people sold each other as slaves first, and the Europeans just came and exploited that. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, there is, but it spun 600 years ago. You would have seen yourself as belonging to your country. I would have seen myself as belonging to my country. And battles take place, like battles would take place in Europe. And whoever gets captured is going to end up prisoners of war. That's not unusual. But the way it's presented is deny that you even had a country, deny that I had a country. So we're now all one group of people called black people. So if we're now battling, well, why are you black people even fighting? You're supposed to be one people. The evolution of slavery, it begins in 1441. Kidnapping is how it began. It was the Portuguese that they realized that they could build slave dungeons. The local ruler on the Ghanaian coast, Kwame Ansa, he was told this was going to be a trading center for goods. He opposed it, but the Portuguese burned his village down. So that's how they were able to build slave dungeons. And then once you now have that, you can now pull even more people out by encouraging battle. One group of Europeans arms your side, another group arms your side, and whoever gets captured is going to end up prisoners of war. And it's only now when some of your people and your people are on the same slave ship that you realize that's what they were doing. Right. And that's why black people that ended up on slave ships and ended up being sent to North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, those were the first to realize we've all been played. That's why these were the first people to become Pan-Africanists.
Yeah, because matter of fact, the elder Apostahar, basically he did a upload of the brother North Carolina, but yeah, showing that speaking of that eyeballs, right? Which goes into Hebrews, right? The Israelite exile from Israel, right? Which basically we went into the interiors of Africa, amazing facts and what revelations, and that's what this is all about, right? Revelations. So see if we can listen to a little bit of this, Lord willing. So there you go.
South America, it became the center for the slave trade to the Americas. But the slave trade was not a new enterprise. For centuries, the Arabs had been paying African middlemen from the Sudan, as well as the East African coast, for slaves to be exported to North Africa and Asia.
We're not Sudan. We're not East Africans. We're not Sudanese. Their lineage goes back to the Egyptians, people of Mizraim, one of the sons of Noah.
The European
Ham, rather.
entry into the slave trade had drastic economic consequences for West Africa. African middlemen became rich and powerful, as did the coastal states from which they operated.
That's why it says in Isaiah 45 and 13, 14, it says that these African tribes are going to come and bow down to us. So all these nations are coming up under us.
But the savanna states of the interior grew weak and unstable as their people lived under the constant threat of raids, capture, and enslavement.
All right, Shalom. I want to give all the praise, honor, and glory to Yahawah, BaHaSham, Yahawashi, BaHaSham,
I
QaDash.
got to slow down so he sounds slower. That there's a reason for that.
Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth. Shalom to the
I got to
hopeful
slow it
elect.
down.
All right, so I wanted to go back through the point that I was making in the response video that I did on Candace Owens. It exposes the hidden truth behind slavery in the United States. All right, and I was making points in the video about how the enslavement of our people was a world business by the heathen nations. All right, so before we get into it, I wanted to kind of set it up with this. So this photo that you see here, I came across this photo when I first came into the truth. I was at the flea market and I saw this little poster. And, you know, in the spirit, I was like, yo, this is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. And I had got it framed. But you see here, it says the African slave trade, which is really the Israelite slave trade, because we're not Africans. All right, you see that the house of Judah, okay, the southern kingdom, was scattered throughout the world. All right, and this is what happened. If I can zoom in here real quick. All right, bear with me. Set this book down. You zoom in here. All right, you can see the routes. You know, you see the slave sign from the 1700s, which goes into the selling of Negroes. All of that, right? Now, the reason why I'm showing this because I want to add. Bear with me. I want to add this book in here. All right, so let's pull that out. I'll pull this back a little bit more. All right, so I want to just add this book real quick. And this, you know, I actually saw this video of a brother breaking this down when I first came in as well. And just wanted to add on to what you see in the photo here. But anyway, from this book is from, it says Ibos, Hebrew Exiles from Israel, Amazing Facts and Revelations by Professor O. Elazee. All right, this is what he looks like here in the back. All right, but I want to go here, as we saw. All right, let's pull this first. So just like you see here, all right, Negroes for sale, but before it was Hebos. All right, it's the same photo. All right, this is out of the book again, Ibos, Hebrew Exiles from Israel. Right, this is page 10. right? And it says historical evidence of Igbo population percentage in American society. It says, quote, this is page 10. It says, this place is a wholesale market for slaves, as not fewer than 20,000 are annually sold here, 16,000 of whom are natives of one nation called Hebos. Ibos said that, so that this single nation has not exported a less number of people during the last 20 years. It says then 320,000, and those of the same nation sold at the new and old caliber probably amounted to 50,000 or more, making an aggregate amount of 370,000 Hebos. The remaining part of the 20,000, the above 20,000, is composed of natives of the brass country called Alakus, and also of the Ibios or Quas, Ibios Quas, right? It says, second paragraph here, it says, spares were the slaves of the Hebo nation. It says, spares where the slaves of the Hebo nation are obtained and held every 5 or 6 weeks at several villages, which are situated on the banks of the rivers and creeks in the interior, right? It says the Hebos, to judge by the immense number annually sent into slavery into chains with iron yoke on their necks, right? Which you read about that in Deuteronomy, right? Real quick. All right, so that's prophecy. All right, Deuteronomy 28. Let's get that real quick and we'll finish it off. All right, Deuteronomy 28 and verse 48. Deuteronomy 28 verse 48, it says, therefore thou shalt serve thy enemies, which the Lord Yahawashi shall send against thee in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness, and in the want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he hath destroyed thee. All right, so this is what happened, man. We went into slavery and our people had yokes of iron upon their neck, and you could actually look up the images. Anyway, all right, finishing that last part.
The Israelis would serve enemies in a land they know not, losing their heritage. Saying Israelis would serve enemies in a land they know not, losing their heritage. And that, to me, I'm trying to be neutral, but that was like, whoa, definitely favored the black people, because black people were taking serve an enemy in a land they don't know.
It says, and even thou shalt discontinue thine heritage.
Here it says, Israelis will be scattered by ships to serve enemies in a land they know not, with iron yokes on their...
I mean, like, we went through the Holocaust, not on ships, but, I mean...
Okay, but if this says, we shall be brought into Egypt again with ships and sold for bondmen and bondwomen, that didn't happen to y'all in the Holocaust. And it says, no man shall buy you or redeem you. So y'all were redeemed, actually. When the Holocaust happened, they had World War II, and they redeemed you guys. Then they displaced the Palestinians for you guys.
You will be forced to withdraw from your heritage that I have given you, and I will enslave you to your enemies in a land that you knew not, for you have ignited a fire in my wrath, and it will burn forever.
So did that happen to you guys?
I mean, the way that I see that is like, look at, we've been like the nation builder.
This is talk about discontinuing from
that verse kind of shocked me when I found that.
Because the only people that have discontinued from their heritage is us.
Land far away, Jews never lost their heritage either. They literally lost their heritage.
You ask black people if they can trace their heritage. When it says you would discontinue from your heritage, we did. Our heritage was discontinued.
Okay, so maybe
we went into bondage on ships. We were sold for bondmen and bondwomen. You guys were never sold for bondmen and bondwomen. We were never redeemed. You were redeemed when the entire earth went to war for y'all. And for our disobedience, the children of Israel gets punished for it. And you claim to be the children of Israel. How come we went through what you saying you are the people of?
Yeah, so what's his name? Captain Tazar, he was getting down though, even though, they do their thing because they ICPK, but he was getting down on that, and of course, they doing that mainstream podcast, all that other stuff. But he was getting down, that's You know, it shouldn't really be doing all that type of stuff. But you know, hey man, he you know, that short. I don't know whether they you know how they put the short together, but yeah, it hits. But yeah, and I think what the dude was getting the dude to do at the end of that, you know, on that short with Captain Tazariak, I believe he was getting the dude to place the word right, because if these are the people, you could say Israeli, or you could say so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indian, and when you say these things and you read the scriptures, it should ring a bell, or it should be able to give you who it really could be talking about, right?
When you replace names to see who fits, it's often called nominative determinism, which is the idea that names influence careers. You might also be looking for an aptronym, a name suited to a job, or in literature, it's called a characterim, where names reveal character.
Right? And the characters we're talking about is what? The Israelites, right? So when the guy kept saying Israeli and then putting that within the scriptures, let me see. Let's go back. Let's go to that. Yeah, so this is Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 4. I think the guy said 17 and 14, but it was 4, right? It says, thou even thyself, right? Israelis, right? Shall discontinue from thy heritage that I gave you Israelis, right? And I will cause thee to serve thy enemies in a land you know not, Israeli. So you're trying to say, the people who say that they're the Israelis, and they say they feel the prophecies by being in the land, but somehow this doesn't fit, right? What you say that happened to you, right? Because if we, you know, we are in a land that we don't know who. Even the other guy who I like the way Apostle Har always does it, would perceive to be an Edomite. Because that's the best way to say, because you don't know. He could actually be a Hamite. You know what I'm saying? He could be an Ishmaelite, right? You know, so many Edomites over there with this master race and this so-called white supremacy, and a lot of you might really be a whole nother thing. Hey, you keep saying that you're you know, when we go back to Hitler saying that you guys are part of the Mongoloid, which goes to Moab, right? You know, so really you could be a Moabite who looks like you know what you would say is a so-called white man. So you can't say these things, man. That's why you have to be spiritual, right? And then, you know, just after when you know all these things, it kind of fits in place now. It all just makes sense now, you know. But you know, to get to the point, and so that sounds like somebody else. That don't sound like them, because they're literally ruling the world. I mean, Disney, you know, Warner Brothers, whatever. What else is what else is out there? What is it? Uh, how do you say? Warner Brothers, Universal, whatever record company there is, whatever studio, they all own, they own them all. Newspapers, all the newspaper company, they own them all. Right? You know? Right? So this is not fitting you. Right? And it says, especially when it goes to this, because they can say, oh, well, we did, and everybody, because that's the thing they like to go to. Everybody went into slavery at some point in time, and everybody's done this type of thing at some point in time, and you know, but we came out and we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, and see, and that's why we have some things. You know what I mean? It ain't our fault. Don't look at us because it's not our fault that we're doing good. You know, right? But if you look at this thing, what do it say? Which thou knowest not, right? In the land that you know not, for ye have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever. So how are you doing good now? You know what I'm saying? And then people go, well, you got so-called black people, so-called Hispanic people, so-called Native American people doing good. Yeah, but that's not the average, right? And they're not the loners. They're also still borrowers, because everybody's a welfare case compared to the Rothschilds, the Bilderbergs, the DuPonts, the Gettys, the Oppenheimers, right? The DuPonts, right? They're welfare cases compared to these. So no. You know what I mean? So it just ain't really fitting. You know what I mean? I was tripping on how the dude kept saying it. I'm like, wait a minute, why is he saying it like that? Because that's not really in the verse like that. But when you say it, you're saying it to give yourself a clue. You know, so you're a thinking man. You're just not a fool just following because it's the status quo. Because even he was like, look, I'm not trying to be like a, jump in the bandwagon or whatever, but it does sound like them, because they were displaced. They are in the land that they don't know nothing about, right? Yeah. So then we're gonna pretty much do the same thing right here on Deuteronomy 28, right? It says Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, and the Lord, which is Yahawah, right, shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, right? So Yahawah, BaHaSham, Yahawashi, right? Because of course the Lord's doing it through the Son. The Son is in the volume of the book. Not to mention the Lord, you know, he comes in a carnation several times within in life, and in the book, right? You know, and it could be times where he came and you don't know nothing about it, right? You know, that's why they tell you to be careful. You could be entertaining angels unaware, right? Because there's many more books. It says there were so many things that the Lord did that it wasn't enough room to fill all the books or things that all that he did, right? So it's a lot, bro. Like, it's crazy. So yeah, so you could put it there. So and Yahawah shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, Israelis. So you're thinking, you put that, and none of that makes sense coming out of your mouth, right? Because this is supposed to be the scripture. This is what's supposed to pertain unto them. So they say. That's what he was saying. You know? And it doesn't fit, because that's never happened to them. Ever. They can't say way back in antiquity in a secret place underneath some rocks somewhere it happened, but it's just not documented, Well, this is meant to be a document, right, of it, you know. And matter of fact, it tells you that right up here in the same chapter that these are meant to be right here. And thus shall become. Matter of fact, let's might as well, because this is heavy. This is what it's all about. It says, and the Lord, the Yahawah, BaHaSham, Yahawashi, BaHaSham, QaDash, shall bring thee and thy king, right? We know that king was Masha, which, you know, and his carnations, you know, he would have had to be what? David, Zerubbabel, Jacob, right? And which thou shalt set over thee, right? And everybody swore, you know, before this truth spread out through the entire world. There was a swearing or an oath that Masha was the king. So they set him up as king, right? It says unto the nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there shall thus serve other gods, wood and stone. And that's happening to our people. That's really heavy right there, right? Christianity, plantation Christianity, and you know, the cobblestone, the Buddha stone, because that ain't nothing but, you know, or metal or stone or whatever it would be when they carve it. Cause sometimes it's stone too. They'll carve a Buddha out of some stones, or even wood, right? You know, I've seen that too, where the Buddha is wood, and they pray to the little Buddha and all that other madness, right? You know, Shiva and whatever else, you know. So it says, and it's this the point, and thus shall become an astonishment and a proverb and a byword among all nations, right? Transatlantic slave trade scattered around the world, so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Indians, whither Yahawah shall send thee, right? You know? Yeah, so skipping down, right? Deuteronomy, same chapter, Deuteronomy 28:45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, right? Because if you're you can't say it was, oh no, it was in the closet, it was somewhere under a rock hidden, right? Because moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and pursue thee and overtake thee till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of Yahawah, BaHaSham, Yahawashi, thy power, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, and they shall be upon thee for a sign, right? You're going to be a proverb, you're going to be a byword. You won't be able to just say you're committing what is it called? Anti-Semitism, right? When that's not even a word. His name was Shum, right? And you're not the only Shumite or Shum. Yeah, well, Shum, but I guess they say Shim. Yeah, Shim. You're not the only Shemite, but it's really Shum, right? You're not the only Shumite, you know? So you should not be able to have a monopoly on that, right? It says, yeah, upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and what? And upon thy seed, right? So letting you know it's going to be generational, which they spoke about that. generational slavery, right? That's what happened to us. Generationally, right? Forever. And as you see this, it's still going on. As long as Esau's ruling, we're known as the people who are just slaves. Though they want to try to take it out of the books or try to change it up and say indentured servants or, whatever they were trying to do, right? But it's forever. It's for a sign. So we have to, these things have to be a indicators, so to speak. Just like we tell you that black is not the overall end all be all, but it's an indicator. That's why we're not talking about necessarily always pointing out the whole dark skin, right? Which black, there's no such thing as black people. We're many shades of brown, but through the ignorance of people, of course, we say black because we're just trying to give you the hey, what do they say, layman's terms, right? You just hey, and that's just what it is, man. At the end of the day, not to call you, ignorant in the negative sense, but ignorant in the true sense of meaning you don't know. So since you're ignorant of the fact, we'll break it down to you. Well, what you call black, they were brought here on slave ships, and when you say Israeli, it doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense, right? By the way wherefore I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again, right? Going back to Deuteronomy 28:68, right? Because, well, I'll read it again. Deuteronomy 28:68, and Yahawah, BaHaSham Yahawashi, shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. Egypt meaning bondage, because that was really Egypt. Original name was Mizraim. Egypt is a term that the Greeks gave it, basically meaning what? Meaning slavery, right? Egypt meaning slavery, because I think Mizraim is just like, because I think that was like a nomen omen too, like a constraint, like between a rock and a hard place, right? So either way it goes, they both kind of represent that struggle. The names, I believe, yeah. And it says, but we were going to go into a place of struggle, slavery, but this time with ships. And that didn't happen in the time of Egypt. It didn't happen in the time of the Babylonians, right? That's who were Babylonians, the Medo-Persians. Didn't happen, right? Because we went into Babylon. The Northern Kingdom went under the Syrians, which they were pretty much the same people. They were related, but they were separate. Same people, same related people, but they were two different tribes. So we went into the Babylonians, they went into the Assyrians, right? We got separated. And then they came over to the Americas. We were still basically over there during the time of the Medo-Persian Empire, during the time of the Greek Empire, and then the Roman. And then here we are together again in the second leg of Rome, but it's explaining how we're going to have that, what do you call it? That reuniting where we'll be oppressed together, right? And this is us being oppressed together, right? So-called Negro, Latino, and Native American with ships, right? Bondage again with ships. By the way, wherefore I spake unto thee, thus shall see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies, right? The enemy says you're going to serve your enemies in a land you know not. You're going to be, and then you're going to be sold to your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you, which the brother broke it down, said redeem you, right? And you didn't get redeemed because you understand you were, and other things. That's why even the Edomite spoke about, or what's perceived to be an Edomite, the guy spoke about it. He said in other things it was never so, where you had a generational chattel slavery. You usually can buy yourself out of, and that's what this is meaning. You're going to have a generational chattel slavery, and you won't be able to buy yourself out. You won't be able to redeem yourself, right? All that, I want to give all praises, all honor, and all glory, infinite honor and infinite glory unto Yahawah, BaHaSham, Yahawashi, BaHaSham, Rawchaa QaDash. I like to give double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well and do well, to the elder apostles, bishops in Connecticut, the bishops, the preachers, the teachers, the evangelists, and the four winds, preaching in truth and sincerity, risking your lives more now than ever, the hopeful elect, Shalom, to the Israelite foreigners, who phenotype may look like another nation, but bloodline goes back to Israel through your father, and have come back to the fold. Shalom, to you sisters, you Achwathium, who listen and learn under your husband, which is your spiritual leader, with meekness and with silence, and above all, Kwam Yasharallah.